Demoralisation. What is demoralising? Is this demoralising? It's a tricky concept because any instance of it is up for debate. Something that I think is demoralising could be encouraging or motivating to someone else, or it could just be an accurate representation of reality, and to call something demoralisation seems to imply that someone is coordinating it with a specific goal in mind, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. Nevertheless, it's a concept I've found very useful in the past few years. It makes sense in my mind of much of what's going on with the so-called wokeness, but it also unifies that with other recent phenomena like climate catastrophizing, the COVID restrictions, and the popularity of Jordan Peterson. It sounds a bit crazy to say that all of these things are connected, but I just want to say again that I'm not suggesting that this connection means that it's all part of a master plan of a shady cabal of all-powerful people who are trying to demoralize the population. Or maybe that is happening, but if it is, I don't know about it. I went to a dinner party years ago, maybe it was up to 9 years ago, and I was listening to a conversation where a man was telling someone about his recent trip to Japan. And I was listening very intently, waiting for the opportunity to jump in and tell everyone about how I had also been to Japan. If you've ever been to Japan, you'll know that everything is remarkably clean and orderly there. The people are extremely polite and very formal with strangers. The man at the dinner party was explaining all this, and he described how the ticket collectors on the bullet train wore very smart suits with white gloves, and how they took the tickets with very graciously with a little bow. And he was so impressed by this that he declared that in comparison we are like barbarians. He said, "We are the barbarians." And the woman he was talking to nodded earnestly and repeated what he said. She said, "We are the barbarians." These two people didn't feel any embarrassment about saying this about their country and their culture. On the contrary, I expect they felt quite virtuous for humbling themselves in this way.
The first one is that classical one, on Sabbath, on Saturday, Jewish believers meet in a synagogue and each of them says something. So first, a big rabbi said, "Oh my God, I am nobody. I am not worthy of your attention, God." Then a rich Jewish merchant comes and says, "Oh my God, I'm also nobody. Don't even consider me. I'm not worthy of your attention." Then, I hope you know the joke, a poor Jew stands up and says, "God, I'm also a nobody." And then the rich merchant kicks the rabbi and said, "Who is this guy that he thinks he can also say that he is a nobody?" There is deep truth in this.
It's kind of a fashionable thing for erudite people to say to each other at dinner parties. Nobody told this man to say that. He was just making a genuine observation. But I think about that conversation now, some 9 years later, because it's part of a pattern which I've started to label as demoralisation. To be an intelligent, ethical person, people think they need to humble themselves in every conceivable dimension, and they get hooked on this spiritual self-flagellation. If you're English, you need to feel guilt about the transatlantic slave trade and about the British Empire. If you're male, you need to take responsibility for the patriarchal oppression of women, past and present. And if you're white, you're racist no matter what you do. And now, if you can breathe or if you have hands, you're in serious danger of spreading a deadly virus. And on top of all that, you're a human, which means that you're contributing to the death of the planet just by living your own little life. Your very existence is immoral, and there's nothing you can reasonably do to live a virtuous life. What's more, you're too stupid to even understand all the ways that you're doing harm to the world, so the very least you could do is sit down and listen when someone is explaining intersectional feminist theory, or how immigration is good for your culture and for the economy. And if someone tells you that something you're doing or saying might be hurting someone, you better stop doing it immediately. And if in any doubt in the future, just be quiet and don't do anything. And after years and years of hearing this, in comes Jordan Peterson. And he's a nice guy, but he doesn't want the Canadian government to force him to be a nice guy. And that's kind of interesting. And he has lots of YouTube videos about how you're not just a sack of useless shit, but you're actually a divine individual capable of taking on important responsibilities and doing difficult things. You could actually improve your life, and you can improve the lives of others. And you don't even know what kind of amazing person you might be if you just kept going and trying to improve everything around you. And that's kind of exciting after hearing the opposite for so long.
I go around and I talk to people. I say, look, there's not only more to you than you know, there's more to you than you can imagine. You have an ethical responsibility to act in that light. You know, because that's part of the message now. Human beings, we're a cancer on the planet. We're headed for an environmental apocalypse. The entire historical structure is nothing but atrocity, etc., etc. Anyone with any ethical aim whatsoever is just going to pull back. You don't want to manifest any ambition, support the patriarchal structure, exploit the environment. You've got to crush yourself down. You shouldn't even have any children. You have no idea. I see people everywhere, all over the world. They're so demoralized because they've been told since they were little that there's nothing to them but corruption and power. It's like, how the hell do you expect them to react? You know, well, I shouldn't do anything then, you know.
To me, the success of Jordan Peterson's antidote to demoralization is just further proof that we've been drowning in it up to this point, and most people still are. Once I remembered how much of this demoralization was programmed into me through the government-funded schools that I attended, I started to have second thoughts about sending my own children to similar places. But I don't believe teachers are demoralizing children on purpose. A recent BBC article details the emotional response children are having to being taught about climate change. They call it climate anxiety, and they frame it as an unwanted side effect of telling children that their normal day-to-day lives are hastening the arrival of the apocalypse. And now we're starting to hear about some of the effects the 2 years of COVID restriction has had on the emotional development of children. It makes me wonder if we'll ever be reading BBC articles about racism anxiety in children, or maybe they'll just keep calling it white fragility. It's easy to use children as an example because their view of the world is so much shaped by their teachers, and because they're so naive and less intelligent than adults, and they have a sort of lower grasp of their emotions most of the time. But all of what I've just said applies to adults as well. Those people at the dinner party who I mentioned were not young adults. They were not university students. These were people who were a generation older than me. I'd say they were approaching 60, both of them. And even though they would never say that they hate England or they hate English culture, I think they probably would have no will to protect it. They would never put up anything to protect their own culture. They might even be glad to see it destroyed if it were in the service of tolerance or diversity. I've described in this video what I believe to be the core of demoralization as it exists today in this country. But when I asked my Twitter followers to tell me what they think of as demoralization, I got a surprising range of answers, which I will briefly outline now. They named things like ugly architecture, pornography, multiculturalism, being forced to say things that aren't true or which don't make sense. And a few people seem to think that the word demoralization was different to how I've been using it. Rather than being something like demotivated or depressed, they said it was to take the moral part of demoralization as ethical. So to demoralize someone would be to make them less ethical, or to make yourself less ethical. And when I looked it up, that actually is a valid definition of the word. The word demoralization means both to demotivate and to make less moral. And those two definitions might seem quite disparate, but I think they are very much related. Some might say that having such a wide-ranging scope of ideas of what demoralization means makes the whole concept useless, but I don't think it is. The disagreement is around what causes demoralization, but the effect of it, I think, was widely agreed on. The end state of total demoralization is that the population is left apathetic, or else just too anxious or confused to act in their own self-interest. If people are convinced that they don't really deserve the good things in their life, then they're not going to put up a fight to defend them. And that's what really worries me about demoralization, is this idea that what the things that make our lives worth living and that we really treasure are just slowly being taken away, and people don't have the will to keep them, to protect those things that actually matter. And it's just so difficult to quantify what was lost. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon.